Welcome to another episode of the Puncher's Chance podcast. I'm John Lodge, coming to you from the Sports Lodge as always, and joined by Jordan Grenke from Castle Grenke. Jordan, back to your normal background this week?
Yeah, I'm able to get back. I can control all my variables this week. I have my microphone back. I've got my own computer back. I'm locked and loaded now. I'm locked in. I'm lodged in.
Lodged in. Yeah, I'm definitely feel like I might be lodged into this space in my basement here, kind of feeling a little maybe claustrophobic or whatever it is, some sort of phobic. I want to go outside. I want life to get back to normal.
Yeah, I know. I haven't left the house in days.
Okay, so on this week's episode of the Puncher's Chance,
Oh my God.
and forgive me as I read this off of my iPad, we have some huge topics to get into. Tony Ferguson wants back inside the octagon. He's called for Michael Chandler, but I'm betting he didn't like the response. McGregor finally signing that contract, so we're going to get to see him, McGregor versus Poirier. We have some Khabib rumors from last week that we still haven't had a chance to talk about. They're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And, of course, we have to talk about UFC 255, a couple title bouts, couple flyweight belts that are up for grabs this weekend. And, there was breaking news that happened today, Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Anderson Silva has been released by the UFC. So initial thoughts on what's going on in Anderson Silva's camp, and could we possibly see this man pop up in another MMA league like Bellator?
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, once the fight gets booked, we can put the original Conor McGregor hat back on. There's no better time in UFC at all than when Conor's booked to fight. So the Conor cap goes back on this week because Conor is in play, my friends. It's like when the New York Knicks do well in the NBA. Like the league's a little bit better. So I love that Conor McGregor's back in the mix. Anyway, yeah, the Anderson Silva stuff, I can't believe it. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's been 14 years with a fight organization, which I think is one of the most unprecedented things, considering most of these organizations kind of have a good 5-6 years and they get bought out. Pride maybe lasts a little bit longer, but people like Strikeforce and, King of the Cage, they don't ever reach the apex that the UFC did. When I was thinking about this after after his fight with Uriah Hall, I thought to myself, he's really older than I remember, because he kind of entered the UFC in his 30s. We didn't get that 18, 19-year-old phenom part of Anderson Silva. We got like the polished, still building his skills, but not necessarily a young, like in his prime. We got to see him in his prime, in his competitive prime. Anyways, the UFC releasing him, I think, is a very, very strong message. But it also, I'm very concerned because, as Dana White said, he had one fight left on their contract, and he had the UFC decided to not release him, he wouldn't have been able to fight in mixed martial arts anywhere else. The fact that the UFC did want to release him definitely signifies to me that Anderson Silva would be getting other offers. It seems like there's places like PFL, and not only just Bellator, but other fight leagues that are offering fighters money. Even this week, we saw Fabricio Verdum get signed by PFL over Bellator, and then Bellator coming out and saying that their goals weren't aligned. And I think a lot of these veterans deserve to cash in if they can. Hopefully they're not used by the organization to prop up their younger talent. But I'm worried because I don't really, as a fan of the sport, I don't want to see Anderson Silva fight again. I think that, he still goes out as a legend, similar to the way Bernard Hopkins, when he went out in his 50s as he's a boxer, like he was put through the ropes, by a younger guy. And it wasn't a passing of the torch. It was kind of a bit of a sad display, to be honest. And he was a legendary fighter. I want to see Anderson Silva stop where he stopped. I think he looked phenomenal against Uriah Hall. I thought he moved great. He landed some pretty good shots, but his chin's not there, and he went around his shield. I'm concerned. I think the UFC did the right thing by Anderson Silva, probably adhered to his wishes, but it makes me really, really concerned that he's going to try to fight competitively in mixed martial arts again.
Yeah, well, that's the initial thought I had when it happened. We had spoken about if his future in the UFC was going to be on the commentary side, or if he was going to be able to fight again, and if so, where. You had brought up the one fight the one fight left on his contract, so
Mhm.
I figured that was a dead horse. And when the UFC did this, it just signified to me, it signaled to me that Anderson Silva has made it known that he wants to fight again. And Dana White, as much as he may be against it, he can't really stand in the way of a man who he built his company off of,
Yeah.
right? So he's just doing right by Anderson Silva's wishes. I mean, in my opinion, doing right by him would not be not allowing him to fight again, because you know that he just doesn't have it anymore. When you saw, like you said, he moved well, but I think he was slow against Hall,
Hmm.
and like you said, his chin was just not there anymore. So I think that that was all we needed to see from him. But unfortunately, this signals that we are going to see some more to Silva, and hopefully it isn't an ugly ending to a fantastic career. One thing I can tell you is Coker has spoken about the possibility of Silva signing in Bellator, and he had said that they are currently happy with their roster as it's constructed. So they will not be looking to sign Anderson Silva. So it would be going to a lesser league, even under
Yeah.
Bellator. So once again, one of the things that I just really don't want to see.
I like this from Bellator, though. I think it's a good move. I had a lot of fun for a little while. I think when Bellator puts on fun fights, it gets me engaged. Like when Ken Shamrock fight Hoist Gracie. I think they're both almost in their 50s. I had to watch it, just for even watching Tito fight some of the later fights. It's kind of good to hang on to that stuff. But there's a reason why they weren't doing, Tito versus Rampage, because it wouldn't have been all that competitive. They were picking and choosing their opponents. But it can still be fun, and if you try to sell it as something else, then it doesn't become fun. But we still have a company, in the Middle East. Sorry, um, we still have ONE FC, right, who are kind of dominating the whole Asian and Japanese market. And they have Demetrius Johnson, they have Eddie Alvarez, they had Ben Askren, right? They have Vitor Belfort now. It might be a league, and they are doing sort of like a legends, in a way, kind of like a legends league. Plus, you get the old Mexican supplements over that way, so you don't have to worry about USADA, etc. But I just don't want to see, you know, I almost said I wasn't going to bring this up to myself, but a friend of mine was like, "Could you imagine?" And this is a guy who trains, right? So this isn't just a regular Joe on the. This guy who trains and has done amateur fights and stuff. He said, "You know what? I wouldn't put it past Bellator to do like Fedor versus Anderson Silva at like a catch weight of like 225, or just do it at heavyweight because Anderson does walk around around 210, 215, 218." When he's at his biggest. And I thought to myself, oh my God, like, could you just imagine, like, literally the two greatest of all time um, in their era, in a way, in the upper weight classes. I'm like, I would watch that because I feel like they're both still at they're not the best, but they're just equally as competitive. So I thought to myself, if they did fights like that, maybe I would watch it. I don't want to see Gegard Mousasi or Douglas Lima in Bellator fight Anderson Silva. I don't want to see a 30-year-old or a 36-year-old versus a 45, 46-year-old. I don't want to see that. But would I watch Anderson versus a guy who has as much of an experience? Would I watch him fight, a guy kind of in his realm and age? Like, it might be fun. The same way I'm going to be interested in watching Mike Tyson and Roy Jones. Similar ages, similar experience. Their chins are probably, maybe Mike's chin's held up over the years because Roy had more fights. But I'm interested to a certain degree. But again, man, I don't want to watch, Anderson Silva versus, Chimaev. I don't want to watch Anderson Silva versus Darren Till. Like, I don't want to watch him compete with the highest level middleweights or even light heavyweights. Because, I mean, once you get to a certain age, you're going to want to stop cutting weight. I could see Anderson Silva fighting at 205, But would I watch Anderson Silva fight Chael Sonnen again? Sure. So it's hard for me to say. I think that, and again, I go back to what Connor said last time we brought this up. Connor said that there's competition out there. There's the right competition is out there. But right now, you can't be in the UFC and do that. I think the UFC, that's why they released him. You just can't do that anymore. If you give Anderson cans, right, he's going to get bottom of the barrel. And if he maybe gets beat by one of these lower level guys, then it takes away from his legacy. But he can't fight the top 5 guys. He'll get smoked. Jared Cannonier's already gone through him. Robert Whitaker would be way too fast. Darren Till would just have too much power, too much quickness. It's just not a good fit for him. And we've seen him against Derek Brunson, and he squeaked out a decision. He didn't beat Michael Bisping. It's hard to say, but I think there's competition out there for him, but it's just not in the UFC. And I think the UFC did the right thing considering the situation. But my God, John, if you were to look up the term moral dilemma in the dictionary, this is exactly what would have come up.
Well, man, there's a seniors league in the PGA. I don't need a seniors league in the UFC.
No.
It's not the same. It's a blood sport. It's something I don't want to watch. And so like, I'm fine watching the seniors league PGA, right? I'm fine watching a bunch of guys.
Yeah. Or what's the NBA one? Big Three?
The big 3. I'm fine watching
totally
retired guys play
it.
basketball,
yeah.
But it's completely different when you're in a combat sport. You don't want to be watching guys past their prime, even if they're facing off against other guys who are past their prime, because both dudes are probably running a massive risk of being injured detrimentally, and it's just not worth it for me, for my emotional, or for the emotion I'm going to feel by watching you get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to watch that. I want to watch people in their prime, and then I want you to move on. And that's got to be really hard for these guys watching other sports leagues. You be able to transition to something like that, and it's just not possible in the UFC. And I want none of it. Anderson Silva should be retired. All these guys who are beyond a certain age, you should be retired. You should not be allowed to fight anymore. It's just not a risk that's really worth taking. You brought up McGregor. You're wearing the McGregor hat. Let's talk about it. He's made some news, more breaking news. We're finally going to get to see it. It is official. Conor McGregor has signed the fight contract to take on Dustin the Diamond Poirier January 23rd. And now we can finally begin to look forward to seeing the mouthy Irishman back in the octagon once again, albeit a year apart.
Okay. I've got something for you, and I've never done this before, and I likely will never get an opportunity to do it again, but I did get permission to do this as long as it was sent with 100% anonymity, and that is fine. So, John, would you like to know the reason why the contract took so long?
Sure.
Apparently, what I'm told is that this fight had to be promoted by McGregor Sports Entertainment and be sponsored by Proper 12 and likely McGregor Fast. That's Conor McGregor's 3 big companies, right? He wasn't going to fight under that unless all 3 companies could be promoted within the fight. The UFC notoriously does not co-promote, and although you may not see it plastered all over the octagon, apparently part of this fight is going to be promoted by McGregor Sports Entertainment. It's going to be very, very quiet. But that was the holdup. Apparently, in this time of COVID, they didn't want that. When Conor McGregor walks in with a $10 to $15 million gate, and that money goes to his whiskey and then his entertainment brand, and you get Conor in the ring, you make it an event. It's bigger than your other events. You can part way with that extra percentage you have to go off. There's no audience now. This fight looks like it's going to be in Fight Island, with no audience or a very limited audience, because again, some of the Middle East and those areas, they're actually their populations are starting to come back. And while they're not considering travel, fans, if you are from Abu Dhabi, could be an option, which would be wild. But anyways, apparently that was what the holdup was. Allegedly, with a source, we'll call him, doesn't matter, it could be either or. I'm blowing this already, but yes. So that was the holdup of the contract, and although we thought it was hesitation, apparently it was literally just dollars and cents. And when you factor in with the fact that even this announcement isn't your regular Conor McGregor is about to fight announcement, just kind of trickled out of the media. It was very quiet for a Conor McGregor announcement. It wasn't a big reveal on ESPN like it was when Jorge was stepping in against Usman. It was like this whole cloak and dagger ESPN exclusive primetime interview. We got an announcement. It's going to be huge. Dana White saying you have to tune in. Nope. Press release. Just a quiet press release, everybody. But yeah, but either way, John, we get the fight.
Okay. This is what I'm reading into this whole situation, and tell me if you could see this possibly happening. and I'm jumping into the future here. But it seems
Mm.
more and more apparent to me with the way McGregor handles himself and the way he handles McGregor sports and entertainment. Could we see a future in 10 years where he either has his own fight league like the UFC, or he has a stable of fighters signed under McGregor sports and entertainment that the UFC will have to co-promote with him?
I can see that could be the trajectory. I think it'll get stomped out. UFC won't co-promote. They don't need to, really. I think what you'll have happen is you might have Conor representing fighters, but I think he has the piece of Paradigm Entertainment as well, which is the management firm or his agency. I'm pretty sure there's some sort of affiliation there, whether you own just stake in the company, or I think maybe part of his signing bonus was shareholders. I don't know, but we'll never see the contracts. But there's something to do with his management team. Conor, I think, partly owns that or has a stake in the company at some point. I think if he's smart, and I think Conor business-wise is very smart, is that at the very least he might go for a co-promotion, but he would be more wise to at the very least like maybe have his own small fight league. But I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of maintenance, and his interest in fighting. I think that what he's doing now with like putting money back into the boxing gym in his hometown or his local football club or it back into SBG Ireland, like the way he's giving back that way, I think that would be the smart way to go. Yeah, I mean, but I know what you mean. Like, I think Conor right now is basically saying, well, fuck you too. Like, I wanted to fight 3 times in 2020. You wouldn't let me. So when I do fight, you've given me my own date, thank you, but it's going to still be under my terms. Everybody wants to see it. It's the only news that people have been talking about for over a month now. Poirier wants to do it. It gets the fight gets bigger and bigger the longer it didn't go signed for, and he got everything he wanted. And I think that his way of saying like fuck you UFC, like I wanted to fight 3 times, you wouldn't let me, so go fuck yourself. I want every piece of the pie. Tough shit.
He reminds me a lot of Jay-Z and the way Jay-Z
Yeah.
has handled himself and transitioned from one thing to the next and from business
Mm-hmm.
to business. Jay-Z went so far as to owned a sports management firm, right?
Yeah.
So he was an agent making millions off of other players' talents, right? So this is a route that I could totally see Conor McGregor taking now.
Yeah.
I don't think he would ever be able to challenge the UFC, but I do think that he could get to a level where he could buy a big portion of it and force his hand.
You know, they have these companies like Submission Underground and Flow Grappling, and these fight companies are featured, or Invicta, right? They have these fight companies that the UFC puts on Fight Pass, and essentially their membership, it's a bonus, right? If Conor wanted to start putting on local fights in Ireland, it's great, but it's just an investment of time. And I feel like Conor at this point in his life is already making so much passive income that it would be foolish to go after something. But I could see him putting his name on something, but I don't know how hands-on he'd be, you know, like maybe McGregor Sports Entertainment does do 3-4 cards a year kind of thing. And maybe Conor's coach, you know, John Kavanaugh's involved in talent scouting and things like that. I just don't see it being a full-time thing that Conor, but it doesn't matter what Conor does because on January 23rd, Conor is going to be fighting again, second time in a year, which breaks my heart for a guy who's literally in his athletic prime. But I don't know if you've seen the behind the scenes stuff and some of the interviews that Conor's been doing, but he is in shape. I am so excited to see him back at 155, which really we've only seen him at once when he won the title from Eddie Alvarez. Oh, sorry, twice, and then he got beat by Khabib. But that to me, I almost don't count that fight because even the stuff that came out after it, it seems like even Conor barely trained for that fight. It's kind of the same story as we heard about John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson in that camp. But anyways, Conor seems to be on this regimen of like certain time going to bed, structured diet. Everything is just literally planned, like, you know, like Ivan Drago and Rocky IV, right? So I think we're going to see, you know, he's got a shaved head. He's got razor sharp concentration. I watched an interview with a Russian outlet called Perry Match, and the entire interview is done without talking about MMA, and it's just about business and a mindset and its focus. And I got to tell you, John, I hadn't heard Conor talk like that in a very long time. It was nice to see him focus, having good reasoning behind his decision making. Spoke highly of his mom, you know, about the future, about being positive, about regrets in the last 4 or 5 years. And I don't know, man. I just got a really good feeling about this.
Well, I mean, he looked like he was a changed man in that fight against Donald Cerrone.
You're right.
And that was a year ago. And if he had continued that progression, as much as he may have some ill will towards the UFC, if he had continued that progression into becoming a better man and a better fighter, then that stands to reason that he's going to be the best Conor McGregor that we've ever seen. And I'm looking forward to this fight. But I'm also looking forward to the fight card, Jordan, and exactly what this fight card will be, how it will fill out. And I can tell you right now that there is a man waiting in the wings. Tony Ferguson has been talking. He's wanted a fight in 2020. He called it Mike Chandler, but Chandler said, "No way, I'm fighting in 2020. But if you want, let's do the co-main of McGregor Poirier." And that, to me, sir, that sells a pay-per-view.
Oh my God.
You've got McGregor Poirier, and you've got El Kukue versus Chandler. Sorry, I'm losing.
Yeah, Michael Chandler. We haven't seen him fight yet.
In my head. Yeah. If you've got those four guys who are headlining that card, then that's a pay-per-view that I guarantee everybody's going to want to see. And whatever you file in underneath, I know it will be a fantastic card, but whatever you file in underneath, those two fights are going to sell the pay-per-view.
Absolutely, John. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's interesting that that Tony ends up essentially asking to be on the card. And you have to understand something too. And this is for everybody watching. Tony Ferguson switched management companies April of 2019. He switched from he left Paradigm Sports and then signed with a company called Balangi Group. And what's interesting about that is that his manager, Audi Attar, has his finger on the pulse constantly. And I think that people knew that this fight was going to get signed. And maybe word got to Tony because he was able to pretty much throw together a pretty bitchin' promo clip of himself, send it to Errol Hawani, post it himself, and then ultimately was pushing him being on this card before we even mentioned it today. And what I find interesting about that, John, is that I think there was a bit of a management slip up here. I think that we kind of knew a little bit, Audi is one of the co-founders of Proper Whiskey, and he's very much still a part of Paradigm Sports. But I just found it really, really interesting that there seems to be this Conor-Tony connection through management and I guess semi through business. And Tony had to jump on us. He knew to kind of push himself. Now, I think it's the right move. I'm totally on board with you, Lodge. I think having Chandler almost like a lightweight tournament, right? I love the idea. Conor has to be the headliner. Putting Tony and Chandler's first UFC fight, incredible hype. Tony Ferguson already has plenty to say about Chandler, about Poirier, and about Conor, right? Imagine the press conference where they're all just barking at each other. Pay-per-view sales through the roof. I think it's a smart play. I think all the other champions are fighting, other than, the non-champion John Jones. We're watching Figueiredo fight this weekend. We're watching Shevchenko. Amanda Nunes is sick. You go up the list and a lot of these people have just recently fought. I say you go for it. I say you put Chandler and Ferguson on that card. You make it a mini lightweight tournament. I'm frothing at the mouth at the prospect.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you brought up a lightweight tournament, and Justin Gaethje, he was out of there pretty quick against the champ Habib. And if you want to, you said a mini lightweight tournament. Well, how about we don't make it a mini lightweight tournament and we just go all out and we make a card of lightweight fights, and then that's how you figure out the interim belt. Now, I've written down, could we see the winner of Chandler Ferguson and McGregor Poirier then go head to head for the interim belt? But if that's not what the UFC wants and they want to make a lightweight tournament out of a pay-per-view card, then you could very easily do that. You've got 3 fights that you could throw Justin Gaethje in. I off the top of my head, I can't tell you who he'd fight, but you could throw him in a fight as well. And then that would fill out who would be fighting for the interim belt, because Habib isn't going to fight just anybody.
Well, I think you're looking at someone like RDA. I think it might be too soon for that 5-round war. But I think you're looking at somebody who, there's Charles Oliveira's in the mix. There's going to be a bottom, right? There's a bookend on each side. You've got the top of your A side. You've got Conor. if it's going to be 3 lightweight fights, the UFC is not going to say it's officially a tournament. They're not going to say that. But the UFC has a history of doing this, and it's good for replacement fighters. If you've got somebody in a similar weight class who is already potentially training for a 3 to 5 round fight, and someone drops out week or two, let's say Poirier gets hurt, and then someone's going to step in and fight Conor. Well, it's happened before. And when you have people in similar weight classes near the top of the card, it makes it easy to switch. The UFC did it a lot when people were getting hurt in the welterweight division. You would see, I believe it was Martin Kampmann versus Johnny Hendricks as the co-main, and then GSP versus Carlos Condit as the headliner. And it was always said, if someone drops out, someone else could slide in. And it's a smart play. But I think especially with unknown certainty and the rumors surrounding the fact that it got leaked this week that it just got tested. So he's choosing to remain in the testing pool, which if you were fully retired, you would want to get yourself out of as soon as possible.
Unless you're Daniel Cormier. Unless you're Daniel Cormier.
Unless you're Yancy Medeiros, who is another UFC fighter who made an awesome tweet saying that he was fucking in his living room at 8 p.m. when USADA came knocking on his door. And he now feels a little bit embarrassed because the guys probably heard what was going on because they had a knock a few times. Shout out to Yancy Medeiros, you stud. But I think Khabib, who respects his private life as much as I think anyone, if he was going to be out of the testing pool and he was retired, he would be out of that testing pool as soon as humanly possible. But with that being said, we have this uncertainty. So we need the next contender anyways. Why not have Conor fight Poirier? Interest level through the roof. Khabib rematch on the horizon. As much as Khabib says he doesn't want it because he choked them both out, doesn't matter. Money will talk. Whether I don't care how sturdy you are, how much you don't care about money will talk. And Khabib could get the rematch with either one of those guys. Or, Tony Ferguson comes out of this thing. He has an impressive win against Michael Chandler. He may have to fight. We might finally see Khabib versus Tony. I don't know. But I think you have those 4 fights at least. You could even round up another one. You could maybe do, Justin Gaethje versus Charles Oliveira. Let's get Gaethje another win under his belt and then put him in the mix, and see how this whole thing plays out, as Dana says.
Yeah, I'd love to see a little bit of a scramble for that, right? Because we know who the champ is, and you say Khabib may not want it, or he may not. He says he may not want it because he choked him out. But who hasn't he choked out? The man is 29-0. Who hasn't he beaten? So eventually, you have to accept that you're going to have to. Well, I guess, yeah. You're going to have to face people that you haven't that you have already beaten, and you're going to have to face them in possibly a different light, in a different. Part of their life, as we're talking about Conor McGregor. Mm-hmm. In regards to Tony, I don't know, man. After what I seen Justin Gaethje do to him, it's just hard for me to believe that Tony, maybe it was that weird weight cut that he did. Maybe he could have a better camp and he comes into his next fight and we see a better version of Tony Ferguson. But it just feels to me like maybe he's lost a little bit of a step there. And so I don't quite know if I want to see Tony versus Khabib as much as that's the one we haven't seen.
Yeah, there's no arguing around that, John. I think 3 years ago, that's everyone's favorite fight. I think first of all, 3 years ago, it's the most interesting fight. I always felt that fight was almost even a little more intriguing in a lot of ways than the Conor Khabib fight. But then the Conor Khabib thing, the drama just got so big that you had to see that conclude, right? You had to have the payoff there. But the thing with Tony is that Tony doesn't, even in the Justin Gaethje fight, Tony doesn't get overwhelmed. He literally fought until he couldn't see. The guy is an absolute psychopath. His cardio is something that is unmatched in the UFC, even by a Diaz brother. Tony Ferguson apparently trains 6 hours a day, like a nonstop. Like he literally spars 10 to 15 rounds, and he like a 3-round fight. There apparently after the Donald Cerrone fight, this is a rumor that after the Donald Cerrone fight, which got stopped, the stoppage essentially, Tony went in the back and apparently hard sparred, like 3 or 4 more rounds, which is crazy because you just want to fight. But this is the kind of guy that he is. Tony Ferguson is the type of guy who, it's like a Chuck Norris joke. But I'm interested to see because you've seen Khabib take rounds off. He did it in the Conor fight. I think he kind of did it in the Poirier fight, but he still won the round. But he just doesn't push. He doesn't push the pace, and he has to gather himself. And Khabib's been a little bit suspect with his gas tank on a few occasions in 3-round fights. I think he's gotten over it a little bit, but you're talking about a guy like Tony Ferguson, who's like the boogeyman. He never ever goes away. But on top of that, Tony Ferguson is one of the best people in the UFC off of his back. He's a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu black belt who, they use rubber guard. They use a lot of sweeps. It's the one Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style that could stifle a lot of the, sit down and kind of, not lay and pray, but pound out your opponent kind of thing, right? So I think a lot of Tony's defense actually mitigates at least a little bit or some of Khabib's offense, which to me is crazy. So it's still going to always be the most intriguing fight for me at that division. And yes, I think my power just went out.
Oh, well, so long as you still have your internet, all is good in that department. Yeah, so I guess it's a pointless question to ask if the tweet from Khabib's agent had anything behind it. The 30-0 tweet from Ali Aziz. I believe that he will be back. You believe that he will be back. Yeah. I mean, he's still in the testing pool. So why would you stay in that? He said, unless you're insane like Daniel Cormier. Daniel explaining that the reason he's staying in the testing pool is because he likes to talk to the people from USADA. He's built a relationship with them. Yeah. So yeah.
Otherwise, they'll never call him, right? They'll just forget about him. He wants to. I think Daniel Cormier again. He's so far it's in my favorite sporting retirement. Like. The guy, I mean, he's still having shit talking fests with John Jones. He's beloved by pretty much everybody. He takes off from his newborn baby for 5 weeks in Abu Dhabi, winning, NBA 2K bets and I love it. His personality is tenfold. Like I love that man.
Let's take a side there for a second and talk about those tweets. But there was a little bit of a spat between John Jones and DC, and DC was having none of it, and he slammed John Jones down as hard as he probably would on an octagon mat at heavyweight. He called John out for the PEDs in the match that John had beat him in, so DC going almost mama bear on John Jones. Yeah. And just having none of his shit, eh?
What I loved about it was that I love conversations that are one of those, well, you're not wrong. And the longer that can keep up. And what I liked is that these gentlemen stuck to it. And the one thing that always rubbed me the wrong way about the Izzy argument was that I'm like, it just got too personal too fast. I like this. John's like, DC, I whooped your ass twice. He says, like, yeah, but you're probably cheating. Yeah, well, don't talk about me about cheating, And Daniel Cormier is going to have one win over John Jones that John will never get back. Daniel Cormier, even as he's retired, maybe John, I'm going to dispel Daniel Cormier's opinion. I think Daniel Cormier stays in the UFC testing pool, USADA testing pool, because the longer he does, the longer that his streak goes for being the most and longest tested athlete on the UFC roster or not. I say keep testing him for another 3-4 years. Have him have the Guinness Book of World Records for the most tested athlete ever. And he'll always have, it's like constantly having a win over John Jones. John Jones, we have 3 suspect tests, right? Happens somewhat after the Daniel Cormier fights or one right after, there's questions to be asked. And I think there's an asterisk where I think John Jones is the greatest to ever do it. I genuinely think he is. I think his submissions, his takedowns, his striking, his size, the way he reinvented how people use distance, the oblique kicks. He's so innovative. People are just starting now to catch up to John Jones, even though they have hours of footage on him, and people are just starting to get maybe close to a split decision. That's dominance. But now you have the asterisks. Like, what did he cheat? One guy who's been tested more than anyone else in the UFC never came close, and his name is Daniel Cormier. And he had one good fight, close fight with John Jones, and rematched him. Both times John pretty much popped. So I think Daniel has that win over John. He is essentially the moral victory. On the scorecards, John Jones is 2-0. Well, really, he's 1-0-1 because it got turned into a no contest. But Daniel Cormier will always have the I never popped, never came close, never had a false positive, never had a picogram, none of that shit. And I think that moral victory is going to be something that Daniel can hang his hat on. And I hope he does, because he was right, but John was right too. I beat you twice. But I did notice this, John. John's going back and forth about some other USADA people, and he really went to town on people's post USADA records. And it was interesting, though, that he left DC off that list, because DC's record would be non-comparable. DC kept winning when USADA came into the picture. In fact, dropped the weight class and started winning, won the championship, went back up a weight class, won that championship, all under the USADA terms. But John Jones and his little Chris Weidman went whatever. Vitor Belfort went 0-3, and when USADA came in, he did that to kind of, push the envelope against cheaters, maybe absolving himself of some of his discretions. But I do notice that he left Daniel Cormier off that list.
One thing I love is board fighters with Twitter.
Yeah, that was a great. Yeah, you sent that to me. I laughed.
Is too good. Daniel, as much as he's got the new Xbox and the new PlayStation, and he's got his. Well, I mean, I don't know if he can get that PlayStation working or not. But
oh my God, man! Yeah, that's what I mean. It's Daniel Cormier in retirement is the gift that keeps giving, man. Oh,
it's
God.
fantastic. He just needs to stay on Twitter. They need to stay on Twitter and just continue giving me this soap opera style content that is just my lifeblood right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we got a pay-per-view coming up on Saturday, UFC 255, two flyweight belts on the line. Figueiredo is defending against Alex Perez, and the living and fighting legend Valentina Shevchenko is defending against Jennifer Maia. Did you get a look at that Shevchenko sisters video I sent you on Twitter?
No,
that was scary, stuff, right? Man. That was insane.
Yeah, honestly, that is like, those are people. This is why Valentina Shevchenko is such a unique specimen. Is that she almost loves and like embraces the idea of like being a tough ass, constantly grinding, striking fighter. I love it. So some of the stuff that she does is unheard of. Her sister is up and coming. She isn't as established yet, but those two are vicious. And I agree with you, John. I would never want to fuck with that family.
Yeah, no, that was really scary, and they were completely in sync, almost on opposite sides of the dummy. I wouldn't want to be that dummy either. That would hurt a lot. Okay, so talking about the two flyweight bouts. Do we see a title change here? I don't think it's going to happen with either one, but if you were to see an upset in the co-main or the main event, where would you expect it the most?
Yeah, I don't see it in the main event, John, or I don't see it in the Shevchenko fight. I think if it's going to be anywhere, it's going to be Perez versus Figueiredo. I think Figueiredo's a phenomenal fighter. I think he's great. I think he's got a long way to go, establishing himself as a dominant champion. But I think that fight with Perez is competitive. I think they're both very fast guys, and it's still a puncher's chance. Whereas when I look at the Shevchenko-Maia fight, I feel like Jennifer Maia's got a certain way to win this fight that's going to be pretty easy to negate for Valentina Shevchenko, and I don't think that she's fought a level of striker with the amount of fight IQ and striking IQ that Shevchenko has. And when I think to myself, listen, Amanda Nunes has a hard time beating Valentina Shevchenko. I just don't see how Jennifer Maia is going to be able to pull this one out. She would have to catch a really good submission, or because I don't think Valentina Shevchenko even puts herself in danger.
Yeah, Maia with the nasty armbar, I believe it was, to get this match against Valentina, and it's one of those things where, like I said in the lead up, the living fighting legend Valentina Shevchenko, she has earned that title as well as Amanda Nunes, right? There are very few people that you can know as they're fighting that they will be in the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah.
Most often we have to look back and weigh their career as a whole. But these fighters, they're so special, and so I don't see Jennifer Maia being able to pull it off against Shevchenko. It would have to take something special, but I don't see her getting herself in that situation. I don't know enough about Figueiredo and Perez to have an informed opinion, which is why I asked you about it. But from what I've seen
Mm-hmm.
with Figueiredo, I believe it was against Benavidez that he got the belt. And that was a resounding victory. So it just seems like and still for me on both these flyweight
Yeah.
titles. Looking at the rest of the card, there are a couple of other fights that I've keyed in on. We've got Mike Perry taking on Tim Means.
Tim
As I
Means.
get into my
Dirty
notes
Bird
here.
Tim Means.
But Mike Perry, once again, making headlines for his corner. He's bringing his pregnant girlfriend to the corner, and I don't know what's going on in this guy's head. I don't know why he thinks so he does, but it worked last time for him. So will it work this time?
I don't know. This is a good fight. Tim Means is the kind of opponent that you want to see Mike Perry fight. What I'm concerned about is that apparently Mike Perry has like 20 pounds to cut with like 5 days to go or 6 days to go, which is an insane cut, but I guess he feels better when he cuts weight later. The science does not back up Mike Perry whatsoever. I don't know if he's even going to make weight. But there was a report that came out that says that he was almost 25 pounds overweight, but I guess it's closer to 19 now. The last person to do something like this was Chris Weidman when he got down to fight Damian Maia. I think in 4 days he lost 22 pounds or something like that, which is crazy. It's not good for you. I don't like seeing it. I'm into fighters having a healthy and long career.
Felder cut something like that, didn't he, for RDA?
Yes. However, it's very hard to maintain your muscle mass at the weight that you fight at when you're training he was training like heavy into triathlon training, like on a daily basis. I think he said something that he was walking around about 6 or 7 pounds lighter than he did when he would just fight and train. So we're talking about a guy who it was already, even his body was conditioned for endurance. So likely that his weight cut, may have depleted him the way. I don't think it was easy by any means, and it sounds like it was a nightmare for him. But I feel like he was kind of keeping his weight. It wasn't ballooning up. He wasn't 20 pounds over his walk around weight in between fights like some fighters get.
Yeah, Mike Perry definitely hitting the Taco Tuesday nights a little bit too hard. I don't know what's going on with his weight, man. Maybe the same thing is going on with his thought process as to not having. I can't remember which fighter it was that was going to be in his corner, but he turned him down and said, "No thanks, no moss. Want my pregnant girlfriend there. She's more helpful to me." Or maybe it's the silence that's in the corner, right? Maybe he just wants to be in his own head and he doesn't want to be having to think about coaches telling him what to do and what not to do.
I loved the Mike Perry cornerman sweepstakes. I actually really enjoyed it for a couple of weeks. Darren Till, his mortal enemy, offered to be in there. Now, I think that would have been a cool thing to do because Darren Till, whatever you want to say about him being a bit of a shit disturber, like he'd be a fantastic coach. It's a high level striker you have in your corner. And if you have him looking in on your game in real time, I think you can put aside your difference. I think it would have been awesome. I do think that John, if I could just kind of pull the curtain back on this whole thing, the commission will step in and say that person's qualified or not qualified to be in your corner. Mike Perry will just make the argument that his pregnant fiance or girlfriend is in all of his camps, has studied his footage, and he couldn't have, like, at one point he was asking people to like pay him to be in his corner. And if you had an extra $5 or $6 you could just like go. But the athletic commission would never allow that, not in a million years.
Oh man, there goes my hopes of having
We
the
missed our
puncher's
chance,
chance.
man.
I was gonna say the puncher's chance could have cornered Mike Perry. We could have been sitting there and having a good old time. But
Absolutely.
not
It should be a good fight, though.
Yeah,
I mean, Tim Means is the kind of fight that you want to see Mike Perry in. You don't want to see Mike Perry go in there against the guy who's gonna, be a jiu-jitsu black belt, or like the Cowboy fight was a good fight for him. You want to see Mike Perry sling leather. And man, Tim Dirty Bird Means he likes to swing leather too, man. That's a tough, gritty guy against another tough, gritty guy. And that's a great piece of matchmaking.
Man, I bet against Mike Perry in the last fight, but I enjoyed watching Mike Perry win. So I'm all for a Mike Perry style fight. I'm all for them swinging and connecting as often as possible. So I just want some excitement. I do not want it going to the cards, because after seeing our boy Tanner Boser get screwed the way he did on the RDA card, oh man, I do not want to see any more judge cards ever again. No, thank you.
Man, yeah, that was a tough pill to swallow. I mean, I've rewatched that fight since. Actually, we should probably take a few minutes for Canadian MMA. One good story is Tanner Boser looked phenomenal, a little gun shy, looked a little bit outsized, which I did not plan on. I thought he would be roughly the same size as Arlovsky. There was a bit of a height difference. I think there was some issues closing the distance. Arlovsky got Boser's respect really early. Lack of diversity a little bit in the strikes. Bit of shell shock, but at the end of the day, like to be able to go through, and in my mind, I thought he would have pulled out at least 2 of those rounds. I thought he pulled out at least 2 of those rounds. You can hang your hat on that performance and feel pretty good. It's kind of an unexpected loss, but you can definitely chalk it up for a personal win.
I was sensing draw the whole way that fight. I mean, as much as we wanted Boser to win, there was no way in my mind that he had lost that fight. It was going to be a majority draw, and we were just going to maybe see it again, or each guy would fight someone else and move on, because the fight was a little bit stale, in my opinion. Whether that was because Boser had got popped and wanted to lay back a little bit and didn't want to get hurt, or both guys just respected each other a little bit too much. I don't know what happened there, but I personally think that it was a little bit of a stinker of a fight when it comes to action,
considering the run that he's on.
Right? Yeah, considering what we've seen, from both men, right? You expected some more fireworks.
And you know what? I love the style that Arlovsky's adapted to, this counter-striking style. It's always been there, but it's even more so now. But Tanner Boser's also capitalized on a lot of openings in his fights as well, and he's developed the counter-striking. He's the quicker guy. It made sense for him to take the counter-striking approach. I think it was counter-striker versus counter-striker, and we lost a little bit of action. So, but you know what? They'll move up and they'll move on. And again, he'll be a top 50 in heavyweight, no problem. I think he gets another fight under his belt. I think you see him fight a couple more guys, and you see him fight like a Taya Tsava, or you see him fight a guy, kind of run of the mill a little bit in that regard. And then you see him make a good run. I think this performance, I think, adds a lot to his confidence, and is ultimately going to be good for him.
Okay, so last fight I want to talk about, we had talked about living legends, and I have to the last fight on, I guess, 255, that I do want to talk about Felder a little bit after this, but we are going to get to see once again Mauricio Ua take on Paul Craig.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to see another living legend on this card. And I mean, after talking about seeing Anderson Silva a little bit past his prime, I don't feel the same way again when I watch Ua now. I felt that way a little bit maybe a couple years ago, but it seems he's reinvented himself in a way where he's able to be competitive again.
Well, everyone has got to remember this too, is that back in November 2019, Ua and Paul Craig fought to John's favorite decision, a draw. And he didn't look at a place in that fight. And this is the thing with Shogun, is that he was such a young, up and coming star, and he was we've watched him develop, and we've watched him struggle, and we've watched him thrive. And, for a guy that has done so much, in his life here, he's getting to be 38. And by the time he fights, I imagine he'll be essentially 39. And I think, you don't see him fight too many more guys. I think that Paul Craig should be a slight favorite, in this. It's a 205 division, and Shogun should have always fought at middleweight. He's always walked around at a little bit over 205. He's always fought at his natural weight. I think him rarely or ever having to cut weight is one of the reasons why you see his jaw hold up. That's held up over the years. You also realize that's why he can keep fighting. I don't think he's ever, taxed his body and used weight as an advantage. But he continues to be undersized. And when you see him fight a guy, like Little Nog, or you see him fight a guy kind of on his level, like when he fought the Dan Henderson fights or fights like that, that's different to me. Shogun and Paul Craig, I think if Paul Craig is probably the top that you can see him in. And on a really, really personal note, like Shogun has been notoriously one of my, if not, I say my top 3 favorite fighters of all time. I think it'll always be for me. In my impressionable age, it was always Fedor, Shogun, BJ Penn in his prime. The GSP and Anderson Silva's always came after that for me. He's the last to me of the old guard. And once he goes, you can almost entirely turn that page of the people stemming from Randy Couture to Chael Sonnen to Shogun to Anderson and all the way onwards. I think he's the last one to go. And I wish him the absolute best. I mean, this is his number. He's number 15 and Paul Craig is number 21. Right. They're both essentially win, draw, win, loss, win in their last fights, the draw being with themselves. They have very similar records. Shogun's 27-11, Paul Craig is 13-4. If you were to inflate Paul Craig's record, he'd have roughly the same amount of wins and losses that Shogun would have. I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Brazil versus Scotland. Paul Craig's 32, Shogun's 38. I actually do see this fight going Shogun's way. Only because I think Paul Craig being the bigger guy, there might be a gas tank and there's a toughness about Shogun as well. But this one's going to be hard for me, man. It's hard for me to watch Shogun fight. He's the guy that him and Fedor tug on my heartstrings the most.
Man, it was for me. It was Lyoto Machida and Shogun Rua. That was the fight that got me roped into the UFC before anything else. So I love that stuff. As you can tell, Jordan has had a little bit of technical difficulties and is unable to end the show with us. I want to thank everybody for listening and watching this week's episode of The Puncher's Chance. We'll be back next week to break down all of the aftermath for UFC 255. As always, like, subscribe, let us know what you want to hear from me and Jordan. You can get me on Twitter at John Lodge Music. Thanks everyone again for watching. We'll be back next week. Peace.